Good evening and welcome to the Orange Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors work session this Thursday, September 12th, 2019. Jody Eimers will be absent tonight. Does any board member know of a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? Mary Tiger and I will be attending the Orange County Climate Council meeting on Tuesday, September 24th, 2019 at 3:30 p.m. at Southern Human Services Center. A few weeks ago, I sent an email to the board members and I asked for expressions of interest of serving on the Chatham Orange Joint Planning Task Force. John Young had performed that duty before, had served that purpose before, but since he's no longer on the board, I need to appoint somebody else. And Jody Eimers was the only one that responded to my message, so I'm appointing Jody to participate on the Chatham Orange Joint Planning Task Force. Announcements by board members. Inka, Iancoya.
So OWASA's annual update to the Carrboro Board of Aldermen will be Tuesday, September 24th, 2019 at 7 p.m. at Carrboro Town Hall. The two main topics will be Agua Vista and system resiliency. Mary Tiger and Todd Taylor will also be assisting with the presentation. And if I didn't mention, me and Bob Morgan will be there. Thank you.
Bob Morgan, next announcement.
The Human Resource Committee will meet on Monday, September 30th at 4:30 in the OWASA boardroom to discuss the request for proposals received for a consultant to provide recruitment and selection services for OWASA's next executive director to select the best qualified consultant. And I've talked to Ray DeBose, and he's agreed to chair that meeting. I am currently working for the town of Elon, and they have called a special meeting that night, and so my services are required at that meeting. Ray has asked me though to fill out the forms on the proposals, and I'll share that information with the committee.
Thank you. Ruchir Vora.
Yes, a meeting has been scheduled between the Chapel Hill Town Council, OWASA Committee, and the Chapel Hill appointees to the OWASA Board on Thursday, October 17th, 2019 at 8:30 a.m. in the OWASA boardroom, where items of mutual interest will be discussed.
Okay. Announcements by staff. Ed Kerwin.
Yes, Vishnu Gangadaran, our engineering manager in charge of capital projects, has our first announcement and introduction.
Good evening, Vishnu Gangadaran, engineering manager for capital projects, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Brad Barber, our newest utilities engineer in the capital projects group. And Brad's been with us since early July and brings a really excellent amount of experience to our capital projects group that really enhances what we're able to do in capital projects. So Brad has over 18 years of experience. He's a registered professional engineer. Spent over 11 years working for a wastewater contractor doing the same types of projects we do at OWASA. So he worked as a project engineer and project manager. And then the last 7 years, Brad worked in the university setting at Liberty University in a few different positions, including director, most recently director of design and renovation, where he managed staff to complete capital projects and renovations of facilities and whatnot. So we're really excited about the skill set that Brad brings to the group. And he's going to be carrying, or he is carrying already, a number of really important projects for us, including several projects at the Jones Ferry water treatment plant. And so over the next 6 to 9 months, you'll see Brad's name a lot as we get a lot of that important work into construction. So without further ado, again, introducing to you tonight, Brad Barber, our newest utilities engineer in the capital projects group.
Welcome aboard, Brad.
Now invite Mary Tiger, sustainability manager.
Hi, good evening. On Wednesday, October 2nd at 7 o'clock, I will be presenting to the Chapel Hill Town Council, giving them an update on Agua Vista, particularly the community and environmental impact that we're seeing in Agua Vista. And I would like to invite any and all of you to join me at that meeting and co-present if you would like. I believe Ed Kerwin sent out an email earlier this week, so you're welcome to respond to that or to let me know later if you would like to join.
So,
Wednesday, October 2nd at 7 p.m.
so did the town council invite you to update them?
We asked to give them an update as part of the, we've been keeping them updated all along, and we wanted to share with them information about registration and encourage the community to continue to register and sign up.
Yeah, that's a good way to word out.
Yeah, and I believe that was discussed at the last OWASA committee of the council and our members, and they supported that. And I had spoke to Maurice Jones, the town manager, about that as well. And I don't think all 5 of you should join Mary, but if one of the 5 appointees, or perhaps the chair, would want to be at the meeting and introduce the item, much as Yinka and Bob Morgan will be doing here soon at Carborough, I think that would be, a great opportunity. So if it's more than one of you, I'll let Ray or Ruchir work that out. But if there is a volunteer, I think it'd be nice, and we would prepare speaking notes, just again from a board's perspective, just kind of setting the stage for Mary's presentation. So I do encourage one of you to volunteer, and I think that would be just a very appropriate way to present that and kick it off.
I think I can volunteer for that.
Well, there you go.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchir. Thank you, Mary. Ed? Additional comments, suggestions, and information items by board members. I'll go first. I'd like to express my appreciation to Bruce Bowen for running the last meeting 3 weeks ago. I found out on rather short notice I was going to be unable to attend, and I knew that Vice Chair Ruchir Vora was unable to attend as well, and so I called Bruce, and he stepped up and I understand did an excellent job, and I thank you very much, Bruce, for doing that. Are there any other comments, suggestions, and information items from board members? Okay, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. Number 1 is an annual report on disposal of surplus property, personal property. Number 2 are minutes of the August 22nd, 2019 meeting of the Board of Directors. Number 3, minutes of the August 22nd, 2019 closed session of the Board of Directors for the purpose of discussing a personnel matter. Are there any public comments on the consent agenda? Are there any questions, comments, or is there an item a board member would like to pull from the consent agenda? Bruce?
Just a quick informational question. Why is it called surplus personal property as opposed to surplus property?
Stephen Winters, Director of Finance and Customer Service. It's kind of follows the tax, what the tax code calls property, so it's either real estate or personal property.
So may I have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Yinka Ayankoya and second by Bob Morgan. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. And the motion passes unanimously. Oh, there's a position reclassification to consider for senior lake warden. Todd Taylor is going to make the presentation.
Thank you. Tonight we're asking the board to consider reclassifying the senior lake warden position and also retitling that position. This is a position over the past several years that has evolved into more than what the current job description is, and then that title of a senior lake warden doesn't necessarily fit all of the responsibilities of that position. What we've done is we've gone back and looked at that, and we've added some things like forestry management to that position that's actually being carried out by the senior lake warden now. coordinating things with our partner agencies like the Forest Service and the Wildlife Resources Commission. That's become a bigger part of that job, as well as being an integral part of the community engagement around the Cane Creek Reservoir and also University Lake. So we're asking the board to consider, there's a resolution on page 4.8 in your packet to reclassify this position, and in doing that, that will move it in our pay ranges. It moves up a couple ranges there. And then also consider retitling this the Reservoir and Land Resources Supervisor, which also captures some of the supervisory responsibilities that this had. Be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
So are there any comments from the public on this item? Okay, move on to the board discussion. Any comments, questions from the board? Bruce?
I'm certainly in support of this, but I do have sort of a definitional question. The first sentence says that the position will oversee all operations and staffing of water supply, reservoir facilities, and OWASA properties. So it implies that it's all OWASA properties. I have a reasonably good feeling for the properties that OWASA owns and controls around the reservoirs, but it also owns the water treatment plant property, the wastewater treatment, and perhaps other properties. So is it all of those properties, or is it strictly properties associated with the reservoirs?
It is both. As you know, we've got a large tract of land that was for our biosolids program.
Yep.
The lake warden also patrols that, marks the boundaries, and addresses any issues that neighbors have out there. That's in close proximity to Cane Creek. We also have, I think it's 125 acres down in Chatham County for the western intake off of Jordan Lake. Lake warden's also responsible for responding to trespassing calls or property line, boundary line issues or anything like that there. So we have called on them to go out to tank sites or things like that, put up cameras to see what kind of activity might be going on there. So they do have a pretty broad responsibility. But as far as the grounds here and at the wastewater plant, that's typically done by the maintenance departments in both of those areas.
And that's fine, and that makes sense. Should the description then reflect that it's actually not all of the land that OWASA owns and controls, but, and I don't know how you might define it, but the land that actually is going to be managed?
I think we can change this to have more specificity in there about.
Yeah, the rest of it looks good to me.
Okay.
Any other comments? Any board members? Okay, so the recommendation is to approve the resolution on page 4.8 to amend the schedule of employee classification and authorize compensation to reclassify the reservoir and land resources supervisor position. So may I have a motion and a second approving this resolution?
So moved.
Motion by Bob Morgan, second by Bruce Runberg. Any further discussion? There's no further discussion or comments. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The motion passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the Diversity and Inclusion Program Progress Report and Equal Employment Opportunity Affirmative Action Report for fiscal year 2019. Stephanie Glasgow.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to provide you with this update tonight on the diversity and inclusion work, as well as the annual Equal Employment Opportunity Report. It is important to note that there's no board action needed tonight, but of course we do seek your feedback. The Diversity and Inclusion Program has two primary goals. The diversity of OWASA's workforce reflects the communities that we serve, and that we provide an inclusive work environment for everyone that encourages and supports each team member to contribute to their full ability toward the mission of OWASA. So with that said, we have our overall diversity and inclusion plan. And you can see here on the slide that these are some key activities. There's more information in your agenda packet in attachment 1, but I did want to run through for you the key activities that have been taking place this past fiscal year and beyond. We do continue to work with our partners to get out our recruitment advertisements when we have a vacancy, and that's very crucial for us being successful in finding great candidates. Our employees are notified by email whenever there is a vacancy. We also attach our referral program information, so employees can refer good applicants as well. If you have good employees, you get good employees through referrals. We prepare very detailed recruitment plans each time there is a vacancy. And I sit down with that hiring supervisor and go over that recruitment plan. Some include telephone screening, some include skills tests, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that we do each and every time is we go over census data for Orange County. And we find out what it looks like for that EEO job classification. And then we also look at the data that pertains to OWASA and pertains to the department in specific. And we identify any underrepresented groups that there might be. We've done a comprehensive review of all of our policies and our procedures, any written documents, any ways that we handle things when it comes to recruitment and selection. And we did that with a visions expert. His name is Vincent Johnson, and he works for the law department of the University of Pittsburgh, and he's been with Visions for many, many years, and he truly is an expert in this field. Additionally, we've had employees receive that initial 16 hours of diversity and inclusion training with Visions. I'm sure most of you anyway, have had that very same training. And we've also trained employees on our standard processes for the interview panels, making employment decisions, and we also provided some training on implicit bias and microaggressions. And we also have a welcome team for each new hire, and that's something we started a few years ago, and it continues to grow. These are voluntary team members, our employees that are interested in welcoming our new hires. They do that for about 6 to 9 months through their onboarding process, and we have found that that's been very successful with retention and just overall onboarding. So those are some of the key activities under the plan. The second thing that we have is our plan that came out of our organizational assessment. We had a ton of recommendations that were given to us by the board, by employees, et cetera, and we're working through those. And it's multi-year, so some things are this year, some things are next year. But we did give the board an update 2 times this year in addition to this annual update. And you heard from the Diversity Resource Group as well as the Diversity Recruitment Group. In each employee newsletter, we have an article highlighting something about diversity, whether it be holidays and things, whatever it might be. And the Diversity Resource Group has been providing that information to us, and they're really excited to do that. We made a lot of enhancements to our hiring and selection process to make it more objective. And just to give you one, small example of that, there's now a letter that the hiring supervisor writes justifying the hire, why we hired this person, what their skills and qualifications are, and how that matches up with the job description and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed for the position. Another key activity was that mandatory supervisory training and voluntary employee training that I talked about. We also did a comprehensive administrative guide. I think you'll remember that your update back in July when Kelly and Kelly spoke to you, they talked about we took several administrative guides and put it into one comprehensive guide. And that really helps the hiring supervisors, employees, people on interview panels, et cetera, understand the process, understand what our goals are, and understand how to get to the end and be successful at the end of a recruitment. And also we made changes to our performance review employee self-assessment. And I have to say that the Diversity Resource Group did a good job of updating that form. And now we make sure that there's in-depth conversation with the employee during their performance review about where they may like to go, within OWASA, what additional skills or training or interests that they may have, or maybe they already have some and we haven't tapped into it because we didn't know about it. So there's a whole lot more areas on that form for them to engage in conversation with the supervisor. So the next slide that I have for you is our workforce race and gender distribution, and this is the past 5 years. In your agenda packet, there's also information on the past 10 years, but as you can see, we have increased from 2015, our minority representation from 20.8% to 27%, and our female representation from 20.8% to 25.4%. So that's that snapshot of the past 5 years. In early June on June 30th of every year, we provide the board, and we have for many years, the OWASA workforce race and gender distribution by EEO classification. So we take that one-day snapshot and report on that every year. And so that's the information you have on the slide in front of you. And in your packet, if you're curious about where a position may fall within the EEO classification, I also put that information in there. So if you're interested in learning where, we just talked about the lake position, where that's located in there, you can find that. I thought that might be helpful for you. But as you can see, that's the breakdown about the numbers I just talked about for this fiscal year. Okay, so this next slide talks about the race and gender distribution by EEO classification when it comes to applicants. We started tracking this data, gosh, I think it was about 4 years or so ago, and I want you to keep in mind that this is voluntary. Applicants do not have to provide this data, but we do request it of them so we can track how we're doing as far as our minority outreach. I think that our outreach and when I mentioned at the very beginning, and our partnerships with other area agencies and civic groups, et cetera, has really helped us and increase the minority applicant pool. So I think those relationships are really key. This next slide shows, I said we have been collecting this data for 4 years, and this shows you the last 4 years. So you can see that we had 1,061 applications in this fiscal year, and that was with 23 recruitments. And so it has been increasing. All right, so sort of new for you to look at is the diversity and inclusion program draft metrics. And these 10 items are things that we plan on tracking and providing information to the board each year moving forward. Some of them are things we're already doing. If you look at number 1, it's the demographic data of the workforce. And for the other ones, 1 through 10, where we had the data for this year, we went ahead and provided it. But we'd certainly like your feedback on this as well. Number 2, we're also going to track the race and gender of those employees that are in a supervisory position. Number 3, we already tracked the race and gender of those applicants. I talked about we've been doing that for 4 years. We're going to compare the demographic information during each step of the recruitment, such as the entire pool, what does the race and gender makeup look like. Once we get to those meeting minimum qualifications, maybe those selected for a phone interview or a skills test, we're going to track it each step throughout the way to see how we're doing. And if there's anything in there that would throw out a large minority population, and then we would have to determine how important is that piece. Such as, do they have a CDL? Do they have, something like that? Number 5, we're going to track the participation of mandatory and voluntary diversity and inclusion training, the number of hours spent on those trainings. Number 8, we're going to track the number of employees that volunteered to participate on the interview panel and what their demographics are. Number 9, track the number of panels used during the fiscal year and the entire interview panel demographics. And then the last one is conducting an organizational assessment every 3 to 4 years and sort of in those in-between years, do a short engagement survey with our employees to make sure that, you know, there's not some new idea or some new way of doing things that employees are interested in, and get their feedback. And I think that'll also help guide how we do those larger organizational assessments every 3 to 4 years. So I just threw some pictures in there. These are the diversity groups, the diversity resource, diversity leadership, and diversity recruitment groups. Our staff remains motivated with our diversity inclusion efforts throughout the entire organization. I'm going to be conducting open meetings next week and provide this very same data that you have in your agenda packet, because I feel it's important for them to be able to come in and listen to it, give their feedback as well on how we're doing and what they might like to see on things that pertain to diversity and inclusion or anything. And we believe that by continuing the momentum and having our discussions that, you know, the program is going to continue to be a success. So I'm really proud of the work done here by the entire organization. So I'm here to answer any questions you have and certainly receive your feedback.
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this agenda item? Board members, questions and comments? Yinka Ayankoya.
Okay, thank you. So I did see the progress report, and I did, everything looked pretty good, but I did have a couple of questions regarding the yet to be addressed items. Is there like a timeline of when they're going to be looked at?
So when we had the organizational assessment, we had originally said things would happen in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And we don't want to rush anything. Some things may take a little bit longer, but we did focus on everything in 2018, and we're currently focusing on the things in 2019. So we hope to be at the end of the list by the end of 2020.
And then I had another, this would be on 5.37 with the workforce race and gender distribution.
Yes.
So when I was looking at that, and also with the corresponding job classifications for each position, it seems like we're pretty balanced on the paraprofessionals, where there's gender and race equality in all of them. Some things I did notice with the office administrators and the professionals, where it's balanced on the gender, but not so much on the race side. That's
For the
just something I
administrative
noticed.
support?
It's the top two, officials and administrators, and then the professionals.
Okay.
So then I guess on the subsequent page, it shows each of the job titles for
Yeah.
each of those. Okay. So when I was looking at it, I was saying, okay, it's pretty much 50-50, you know, you have equal gender. So I was just looking at where the inequality lies, and it would just be within the races. And that was just something that I noticed. The other thing that I noticed was on 5.44 and 5.45 with the board. The reason I noticed it, because it was saying that there's 2 African Americans, and I didn't know who the other one was, since I was the only one throughout the year. So were that additional numbers?
I did not have a list of how people identified with me tonight, but I can get back to you.
Look, okay, yeah, thank you. So if you could do that, that would be great. And
You're
I'll-
talking about for FY 2018.
This one says, it doesn't say which fiscal year, it just says OWASA Board of Directors, Race and Gender Distribution,
Okay,
and it's on attachment 8.
on June 30th.
Yeah, so attachment 8 and attachment 8, exhibit A are the ones that I
Certainly.
need a clarification. And that was it, everything else looked good, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Bob Morgan?
Just want to thank the director and the HR department and all the staff for the continued support for this program and the energy that they're putting into it. It's one of the things that I feel most proud of, that I had a small part in contributing to this organization. I think it's very important. And I know there's other people on the board who also feel that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bruce Bowen?
Yeah, Bob, I agree with what you say. This is, OWASA really is a model in the community. A quick suggestion maybe, on page 5.3, you list 8 or 10 channels that you post or advertise, whatever, open positions on. I was talking to my wife last night about that, and she came up with a handful of others that perhaps we've looked at and haven't yielded, or perhaps we haven't, that I wanted to share. One is primary and secondary schools that have a high percentage of minority kids. By definition, they'll have a high percentage of minority parents, and it's relatively easy to get messages to the parents that way. Libraries also. Schools and organizations that offer adult ESL programs. Food bank, food distribution organizations. And then finally, private businesses, for example, Hispanic groceries, she mentioned, farms that employ refugees, and beauty shops and barbershops. I know there are programs with African Americans through beauty shops and barbershops to disseminate information. And there may be some others also.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any other comments from Chair? Laura?
Yeah, I think I agree that it's a lot of progress. One thing that I think this links back to what Yinka was saying about where some inequality might be. I think an avenue to change that would be, during the performance review, and it sounds like this is kind of, well, C is one of them is not yet addressed, but I'm hoping this will, once we finalize or go through this progress report, we'll have a good way of handling this. But really what I'm thinking about is, and we do this at my company and it really helps, clearly identifying, where the person wants to be, in some sort of time frame and what they need to do to get there in terms of training and certifications and so forth. And I think some of that's already, I think I saw something like that was already there, but 54 is where I was really looking at it. So I'm really hoping that gets a good amount of address, I suppose.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great work.
Any other comments? Well, I'd like to echo what Bob said also, and thank everybody that's been involved with it. I know it's been a tremendous amount of work and seen a lot of progress in the short time that I've been on the board. And thank you also for including the board members. So we have a session coming up with the 2 new board members, DNI training and orientation. And then we'll have a session is planned with the full board that's going to be coming up. And I look forward to both of those sessions. Note the key takeaways on 5.5, and I think that's well said. I agree that those are key, and that shows a lot of progress made. And also want to thank you for the responses you've given tonight and in the packet to the board members that had suggestions at the July the 11th meeting. And I think that's real good. You did a lot of work to get ready for tonight. It's pretty obvious, and the responses to those 3 board members were not easy to put together. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. So item number 6, Agua Vista project update and impact. Todd Taylor.
Thank you. I was telling some folks earlier today is my 6-year work anniversary at OWASA.
All right.
And it's I was telling them that when I first got here, John Green was a general manager, and we had a little overlap of time. And one of the things he handed me was, oh yeah, by the way, there's this NERTS committee meeting on AMI, and here's all the stuff you need to do, and you got a presentation you got to give in a couple weeks on this. And I was like, okay, sounds good. We're off to the races here. So it's only fitting tonight that I'm actually giving you the update 6 years later of us wrapping the project up and, the impacts it's had on the organization and kind of where we're headed here. So without much further ado, way back then when we were talking about Agua Vista and in the infancy of it and talking about the feasibility of it, we promised some benefits that we would receive from having the system. One was better water conservation through early leak detection. Another was operational efficiency gains and increased meter reading accuracy. We had also promised the community that they would have online water management tools, so they'd be able to get in there and see how their consumption was tracking and things like that. And then we also promised that we would put fewer miles on our vehicles and we'd be making less trips out into the community. So tonight we're going to talk about, well, have we done these things? But first of all, I wanted the project actually, I want to give a little snapshot of how the project went, the actual deployment of the system. We had started back in June of 2017 and we actually finished up this past June, and you can see all of the activities that we had laid out there. And one good thing you always want to say about a project is we did finish on time and we got all those things done during that time. And then also talking about the financial side of the project, we're looking very good as far as what our payback is on the project and our net present value. And a lot of those have improved since we did the feasibility study. In the feasibility study, we said the project was going to cost about $6 million. Well, we actually spent $5.3 million, so we were $700,000 under budget. And that's always a good thing in a project, to be on time and under budget. You want those things to happen. And then our O&M costs, we're expecting to be less than what we had projected in the feasibility study. But probably the biggest impact on the project has been the fact that we got the low interest loan from the state, which lowered our cost of capital by less than half of what we had projected it to be. So those things have resulted in, we're looking at a positive NPV of over $3 million now, and we're looking at a simple payback on the project of less than 10 years, which so it saved us a couple years in the payback of that. So we're very proud of those things, but more importantly, we think that's great that we did that, but what did we actually benefit by doing this project? And as you can see, one of the things that we wanted to do was get to that operational efficiency. And if you look at that chart in the lower left-hand corner there, you can kind of see how that's tracked over the years, and it's all related to what we call truck rolls, which are really service requests out to a home or a business where there's a dispute about the meter reading, or customer service got the meter reading in and something doesn't look right because this is way more than this customer's paid over the past several months or something like that. And back in the days before Agua Vista, when we were just doing reading by hand, there was a potential for some human error to come into that. Somebody could, instead of punching 6, they punch 9 or something into the handheld data collector. But as you can see, those truck rolls have gone down, and what we're anticipating, if they keep on the pace they've been so far this year, we'll probably have knocked that down by about 2/3 of what we were doing before. So that's a significant savings in time and, just vehicle usage and personnel, having a lot of personnel having to run around and do these things. Some of the other benefits that we wouldn't have had without this system, and these are just some of the little goodies, are that it will alert us if it believes that the meter's been tampered with. So since we've had the system online, we've had 17 such events that we've gone out and responded to over the past 12 months. And most of these turn out to be, it's just something, a wire is kind of wiggled loose or something like that. But there have been instances in the past where people have tampered with meters, but we haven't found those yet. But it's nice to be able to, you're getting this notification that something's going on out there and we can go and check it out. Also, backflow events. Anytime the water goes backwards through the meter, we get an alert on that. And we've had 37 of those in the last year. And a lot of those end up being just, expansion from hot water tanks or something like that. But we've also noticed that if we have a water main break in the area, sometimes that can contribute to this. And we've also had several instances where the check valve that's in the meter yoke has failed and we have to replace that. So this is all good information, and it's, you know, proactive in helping us go out and fix and identify things. So another key thing that we wanted to focus on was customer service impacts. And if you look at that chart on the left there, billing adjustments are, again, you know, something doesn't look right with the meter, the readings that they got, or, you know, there's times when, you know, the meter just didn't seem to work properly and we had to estimate a bill or something like that, and we've had to adjust bills. And you can see that this, again, has probably knocked down 2/3 of that need to adjust those bills. And that speaks a lot to customer confidence when we're not estimating our bills and having to do things like that. And we've got really good data now. You know, if somebody calls in and disputes a bill, you've got that hourly reading, and it's, you know, it's pretty consistent of how they've been using water or something like that. And then all of a sudden you see a leak or something along those lines. So very powerful tools for our customer service folks. One interesting aspect of it is this method of bill payment, and we've been tracking this, and this is an area that we're hoping to improve upon. But you can see we still have a significant portion of our customers that are paying with a check or with cash, and that also indicates that they're probably getting a paper bill. And one of the things we would like to move towards is paperless, and also to get people, you know, to be using direct draft or credit card, and just it cuts down on a little bit of the workload for our customer service folks, not having to deal with paper checks and cash and that kind of thing. So a very important aspect of it, as I said before, was we wanted to give our customers the tools to be able to go in here and look at their consumption. And you can see this is the registration on our web portal, and we're very close to having 30% of our eligible accounts have registered on the web portal. And you can kind of see the breakdown there. We very much appreciate UNC 100%. That's what we'd like everybody to be at. But it's that's one customer with a lot of different accounts. And then also the schools. You can see that middle section there. The schools and the municipalities. They've been very good about registering for this. Where we'd like to see some improvement, obviously, is over in the single-family residential. That's still hovering around 25% or so, which is a lot, but that's probably where most of our accounts are. So we'd like to see some improvement in that area. And then we've got usage statistics about what people are doing when they go into the web portal. And we've kind of broken them into three big categories, and we'll start with the super users. These are people, since we turned on the web portal back in May till the end of July, they've been in there actively doing something 10 or more times. And so these are, people that are really into this, and they're really looking at the data on a regular basis. So some of the things that they're looking at, if you look at this right-hand chart here, this is just kind of a profile of hourly data, so they can go in and actually see, well, how did I use water yesterday, or they can look at it over the week or over the month. Something we found interesting is that 79% of folks are actually logging in via the desktop computer. Now, we, going into this, would have thought that the mobile platform would have been more utilized for checking this out, but it's not been the case so far. So that's just an interesting little nugget that we've learned from this. The next group that we have are kind of the monthly check-in folks, or what we call the bill checkers. When they get their bill, they go in here and kind of see if everything's matching up with what they see on their bill versus what's in the system. And some of the things that they get when when folks go in is, you can have these little comparisons that show you, okay, how did I do this month versus the past 2 years at this same month. And then, how am I stacking up? My water use at my house stacks up to other users that have a similar profile to me. So they can get a little information like that. And then they can also go in and see, water conservation tips. So what they can do to improve, their consumption numbers. And then we have folks that, and this is the majority of folks that go in, they set up the, the web portal, and pretty much that's all they've done with it over that time period. But we feel like that's great, and especially if they will go in and update their profile, because if they'll update the profile, that really helps inform the algorithms in WaterSmart to better kind of parse out where water's being used and things like that. And then also, on our communication preferences, setting up leak alerts, that's very important. Let us know if you want to email, text message, your daily use notifications, how do you want to get those? And then if you want bill forecast notifications, you can do that on there as well. So speaking of leak notifications, this is probably one of the biggest aspects of this that affects conservation and that area is we've noticed since May 1st when we turned on leak alerts, we've had over 3,000 leak alerts that have gone out to customers, and you can kind of see that little circle chart in the middle there. Most of those have been going out in email form. We don't have an email address. We'll print out a notification. We send that out as well, or we'll have staff call. One of our concerns about the reliance on email for these is that we've got to make sure we've got people's correct email addresses. 20 years ago when somebody set up their service, they may have had an AOL account or something like that. I know I've got old email accounts out there that I'm sure I'm still receiving messages to that I don't check anymore, but that's one of our concerns, and one of the things that going forward, we really want to make sure that everybody's got their current information in there. One of the things we'd like people to do more of is actually confirming the leaks. Most of these notifications go out, everybody's busy, you get the notification, you get it fixed, you go on with life. You don't go back into WaterSmart and say, oh, this is a confirmed leak. But again, that helps us, and it helps inform the algorithms behind WaterSmart. And you can see there the information we can get from that are like average leak rates and what's the average time to fix a leak. And then that helps us do little calculations like that one at the bottom there, where we can say, of all these leaks that we have, because they've been fixed so promptly, instead of waiting for the next bill to come out 30 days later and that leak would have gone on that time, you can kind of estimate how many gallons of water we're saving through that. So we really like to encourage people to go in there and confirm the leak when they get that. So that's something else we're going to be working on going forward. But you can see toilets are our main culprit on these confirmed leaks. Leaking toilets seem to be the majority of the leaks that we're seeing. And then we've had some really great stories coming out of customer service and just some testimonials about, how this system has helped them out. The one I'll start on the far left. This was a senior citizen that's on fixed income. So, very important for them to try and keep their bill down. And they were very complimentary of the new system and being promptly notified that the leak so they could have it repaired. The one in the middle, this was one that actually, the 135 gallons per hour is a pretty significant leak, and it, if the problem had gone unabated, would have caused some significant property damage for these folks. And then the one on the far right is where somebody, this was a toilet that just kept running. They had a cat sitter at their house. They were out of town. So that's something great about this system, is just because you're not at your house, you still get these notifications. So they were, they were very excited that they were able to get that notice and be able to send somebody over there and get this stopped right away. So what's next for Agua Vista? Of course, like I said, we want to continue the outreach and promotion. And like Mary was talking about earlier, she's kind of doing a tour of the our towns around and trying to get the word out even more and trying to promote this. And we'll continue to do that going forward. One of the items that's been on our minds for some time is how we can, go to smaller billing increments. As you know, right now we bill in thousands of gallons, and it can be really difficult for somebody that's trying to conserve. You may not see any impact for 3 or 4 months, because it doesn't show up on your bill. So we want to move to that, but one of the things we're considering right now, Stephen and Dan in IT, is going to a different billing software. So it doesn't make a lot of sense right now to try and put the effort and expense into our current billing software and then turn around and have to do it again with a new billing software. So that's something that's definitely on our radar, but it might be a little ways off before we get to that. And then, of course, we want to move people more towards self-service. It's definitely, like we were saying before, we want to get away from the paper. We'd like for more people to be able to get in, see what's going on with their bill, and be able to diagnose it themselves. If it's a Saturday and you see this, you can get on there, you can look at what's going on. You don't have to call one of our customer service agents on Monday. And then we want to leverage this data for other purposes. Right now, we're gathering all this consumption data out there, and we can slice it and dice it in 100 different ways, and we want to start looking at how we can do that. And then we also want to consider add-on technology. This AMI network allows us to have different devices on it, and it is part of the Internet of Things. So we're thinking that as technology improves, there may be opportunities for us to use this for other devices and other communication needs. So we're looking forward to seeing what's coming down the line as far as that's concerned. And then to wrap it up, all these benefits are great, and the project's been a very big success, but I was reminded this morning of just how powerful this whole experience has been for OWASA. Going into the project, we had a lot of concerns about how ready was the organization to accept all this change and how everybody would work together to get this done. And I can tell you that what we thought was going to be one of our biggest hurdles actually turned out to be one of our biggest assets, is that everybody really pulled together on this project. And, when I came here 6 years ago, there were definitely some different camps that were set up. Folks weren't necessarily working together and talking to each other, especially when it came to meter reading and billing and things like that. But everybody's really come together, and this morning we had our staff meeting with all the supervisors and managers at OWASA, and everybody was just complimenting each other on how good of a job this person did and how good a job this person did and how we're continuing to do that work. So it's been really powerful, really transformative to the organization, and I really think that's one of the key benefits that's come out of this. It's probably not, it's not in the numbers, it's not in the benefits that customers receive, but it's definitely been a benefit to this organization. So I thank you for taking the time to let me update you on this, and be happy to answer any questions you might have at this time.
So thank you, Todd. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Board members, questions and comments? I am Koya.
So thank you. I did have a question regarding the billing increments. I was kind of confused when I'm looking on page 6.6. If a new system has already been identified or what, just because when I'm seeing it says, through research, we found, determined that the potential for billing errors and data errors. But then I also see somewhere in the third paragraph, it talks about there have been considerations among vendors and systems that have evolved. So
I think what this is addressing, I could let Stephen talk about it, but if I screw up, he'll come up and let me know. But I think what's happened is that the billing software world has evolved since the last time we looked at it, probably about 5 years ago. And there's been some mergers, there's been some acquisitions, things like that, and there's new products out there on the market that weren't available at that time. So we want to explore those. I mean, we may end up back at the same place and say we're going to stick with what we've got, but we think it's time now to take another look at billing solutions and just see where that takes us as far as this is concerned. If we end up back where we were, when we may say, well, we could have done the billing increments earlier, but I think it's worth a look to just go out and see what's out there in the market right now and not duplicate efforts if we wanted to, you know, go switch to another billing software.
No corrections, but I think the research, if I heard your question right, may be, we did some research on changing the billing increments from where we are now to smaller with our solution, with our current solution. And that research came back and the message was pretty strong. It says that's lots of room for error. In fact, no one has done it with this particular package before. And one of the reasons that we want to look around is that, you know, we've forever with this organization not been completely happy with their support. And so a lot of those things just made us nervous about wanting to do it. Coincided with the things that Todd mentioned about us. It's time we want to look at what's available now. So I think that may have been the research part.
That explains it. Okay, thank you.
So that's your current plan to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, I think we're planning on doing that soon, right? Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
fairly soon.
Okay.
It's a long one.
2 years at OWASA is not, it's not long.
Yinka?
Yeah, so following up on that, I know if we're not going to be looking at it, changing the billing for a while, it kind of, the perception of once we have this in place for a year, see what the data is, and then discuss how to lower people's bills isn't really what's actually going to occur. If someone lowered their own bill, and here it says it'll take about 4 months for them to see a lower bill. So is that every 4 months they'll see a slight decrease, or there won't be a decrease in their bill overall?
Well, what that's getting at is it's going to take, you know, if you lowered your bill by 250 gallons every month, you know, you lowered your consumption by that much. Before you saw 1,000 gallon reduction, it's going to be, you know, it's going to take you 4 months to see that in your bill. And then it's just going to start over because what it's doing is, you know, it's rounding up or it's rounding down every time. So it's going to take, you know, you're going to have this kind of a sawtooth effect going on.
So basically, people's bills are going to be the same whether we had the Agua Vista or not, if we're not changing billing increments or systems.
Well, I don't know that they'd be necessarily the same. I would say that they have the opportunity now to see where their consumption is and they can take those actions. And then whether that, you know, is 1,000 gallons or 10,000 gallons, that's really on their consumption profile of whatever it is. I think the bigger thing that Agua Vista does is it's kind of an insurance policy against having this huge bill if you have a leak, you know, and there are, you know, ongoing, like if you had a small toilet leak that was going on constantly, this will identify that and allow you to fix that, which could overall lower your bill because you don't have all that background of water usage. But the disconnect is that you got detailed information in WaterSmart and Agua Vista, but when you get your bill, it's not, you don't have that same resolution. You don't have, you know, okay, I worked really hard. I reduced my consumption by 100 gallons. You're still going to see in 1,000 gallon increments. You're not going to see an immediate drop.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Bashir, Bora?
Yeah, this is fantastic and great program. The only question I had was on customer service. I was curious if this has increased customer service, like hold time or, you know, number of calls or anything like that.
It has. I mean, it's been a learning experience for customers as well as us. So we do get a lot of calls now how do I get onto the portal? How do I do this? How do I look at that? So they are fielding more calls. We're getting leak alerts out to people. So it's not that, once a month, there's this big rush of people, hey, my bill's high. Now it's more of a constant flow of every day there's leak alerts going out. So people will call us asking, what's this leak alert about? What's going on here? So I don't think I'm saying anything that Stephen wouldn't agree with, that the workload for customer service has increased right now, but we anticipated that would happen, and we anticipate that it will subside once more folks become more familiar with the system, how to interact with it, and, more folks are registering for the web portal. I think a lot of that, that 30% of the folks we have registered now is in large part due to the efforts of our customer service folks who have been encouraging people, to sign up for this service. So we do expect that the workload for them is going to be, a little bit more now, but hopefully over time, it actually takes off.
Do we have a metric or some way to measure that sort of thing, or?
I'll turn it over.
We measure, our phone system's not great, but it does give us the ability to measure on hold time, drop calls, and things like that. In terms of workload, we've not come up with anything right now that measures it, like the impact of this system versus before the system. The things that Todd mentioned are true. We're spending some time with customers in a different way than we did before. It's more productive now as we're dealing with happier customers because we're being able to help them out as opposed to dealing with it after the fact. But there's also some things that we have tweaked and that we need to continue adjusting in the system that will reduce workload. There's some things that ought to be and will be a little bit more automatic as we mature with the system.
Might be worthwhile to kind of track that too. Yeah, okay.
Some of the numbers are incredible that you presented. It's a matter of dealing with things in more real time than the old system would ever permitted. I think in the report it said that the response to a leak notice was the average response to fix the leak was something like 7 days or something. You couldn't even have measured that in the old system in a number of days. It would have been a number of months, I guess.
Well, and it could never have been identified. I mean, like one of those small toilet leaks that just goes on and on and on. And, that's your consumption. It was there last year. It's here this year. Looked the same. May not have been identified. So definitely, I think the benefits are going to the customers in that regard.
Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.
Next on the agenda is the long-range water supply plan, schedule update, and final water supply and demand side alternatives. Ruth Rouse and Mary Tiger are going to share this presentation.
Right. All right, thanks, Ray. Yeah, this is going to be a tag team with Mary Tiger. So I'm going to give you a quick overview on where we've been with the long-range water supply plan. I know a couple of you are new on the board. Some of you have heard this several times. So, and then where it is that we're going, and talk very briefly about the supply side alternatives. And then I'll turn it over to Mary, and she'll talk about kind of the tour we did this summer and some of the demand side alternatives. All right, so this project has not been in place quite as long as Agua Vista, but this shows the tasks that were outlined in a project charter that the board adopted in March 2014. And that charter outlined our project need, why we want to do it. One of the things that relates to what we're doing this evening is some of the supply alternatives that were taken off the table through that charter. So in 2010, we looked at a proposed reservoir on 7 Mile Creek. We said, we're not going to look at that again. So there are some alternatives that we said we weren't going to look at. We also before we got to task one, also developed a community engagement plan. And that was initially adopted by the board in February 2015. And then when we brought task one, the goals and objectives, to the board in November 2016, the board identified, well, really what the public is most interested in is how much water do we have, how much do we need, and then what are the alternatives and what do they look like to meet those demands over time. So we modified it to reflect those comments from the board in November. So goals and objectives, the board did adopt those back in November 2016, and those look at, that's what we will be evaluating the supply and demand management alternatives against. And we looked at the outlines the 3 pillars of sustainability. So you want to evaluate them against environmental goals, as well as social and then economic goals. And then as part of that, how much water do each of those get us? We've completed demand projections. That you adopted those or approved those in March of this year. And the yield was done at that same time. Really, the yield is pretty much the same as it's been in the past. If we have a new drought of record, that yield line will come down. And then here we are looking at supply and demand management options, and that's really the meat of the plan, is this alternatives analysis that we'll do on the supply and demand, the supply and the demand management alternatives. And then we'll bring that into the plan itself. And my vision for that plan is that it's going to be actually a fairly short document that references these longer documents that you as a board have looked at. So this is our draft schedule. I think probably the most aggressive date on there is that January 2020. There are a couple alternatives that Mary's going to talk to you about that really involve UNC. We need to make sure that they're comfortable with everything that we're bringing back to you. And that's where you'll see the draft alternatives analysis, provided that you bless the what we bring you this evening, which reminds me that I did forget to tell you that what we're looking for from you this evening is approval of the list of supply and demand management alternatives, and we would request that you do that through a motion. Then we'll take those draft alternatives analysis, bring it back, incorporate any changes that you would like to see, also do a little in accordance with our community engagement plan, engage community members that we said that we would do, and bring that back to you. And we anticipate that would be in about May. And then you would receive a draft long-range water supply plan in July, and that fulfills my goal of getting a draft to Ed before he retires, so he actually can provide some feedback on it, since he's been in this long process with us, and I do value his feedback. And then we're looking at October-ish to get through the final long-range water supply plan. So the supply alternatives, you all saw these back in April, and you approved this list. We did run it by the community engagement process that Mary's going to talk to you a little bit about. We did not get any new supply alternatives. There's a couple demand management ones that fall you could argue it's supply with reclaimed water, or you could argue it's demand management with reclaimed water. We put it on the demand management list, but those could be on this particular list as well. But there are just the same 4 Jordan Lake alternatives. One's just to continue with our mutual aid agreements that does not guarantee us capacity that we can access that, but if Cary and Durham can spare the water, they would get it to us. We could also look at new agreements, either with Cary and Durham, who we currently have mutual aid agreements with, or with Western Intake Partners, who are Durham, Chatham County, and Pittsboro, that would guarantee us access either through existing plants or through a new plant on the west side. And that 4th Jordan Lake alternatives, that we would be a full partner owner in that a new plant and intake on the west side of Jordan Lake. Shallow quarry, we're moving forward with that. That quarry is stopped mining in December 2030, and then we will have access to a larger quarry. So that is but we will still evaluate as part of the alternative. And then looking at that both with existing pumping infrastructure as well as if we went down to deeper depths. And then there's indirect potable reuse options with returns from the wastewater plant to both the quarry and University Lake, and then direct potable reuse where we pump it back to the wastewater plant or put another plant on Mason Farm and pump it into the distribution system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary to talk about demand side and our community engagement process this summer.
Hello again, Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager. So inherent to demand side strategies requires those that are doing the demanding to be involved and engaged. So we started this, identification of what demand strategies to include and to put on equal footing with the supply side strategies with a public engagement, community engagement approach. So Ruth and I spent the summer meeting with folks across the community and asking for their big, hairy ideas about demand side management. What could we do? Not tomorrow, not next year, but thinking out 50 years. How can we really move the demand needle in a significant, measurable, and sustained ways? So that's where we started the conversation, and the kind of, let's start big, and then over the course of this whole process, narrow it down to those ideas that are really, kind of worthy of considering and diving deep into. So we met with these folks here and brainstormed those big, hairy ideas. So staff of both of the towns, we had one-on-one phone calls with self-identified green builders, the school system, the UNC, and UNC healthcare staff. So some of the really biggest water demanders in our community. And then once we had those big, hairy ideas, staff combed through them, pre-screened them against a criteria so that we could really start to think about those that had the potential for the biggest impact. And we were looking, as we were combing through those, on a qualitative basis. So not necessarily looking at hard and fast numbers, but really how much did we think that a certain strategy could move the needle, in a really big way. That was a pretty big, important consideration. And we also thought about the cost to society to implement this. Is it a costly measure to pursue? And then the ease of implementation. And given that, I guess what I will say, when we came out of that, there were no obvious low-hanging fruits like, wow, we should have done that yesterday, or we should do that next year. Nothing really kind of hit every single mark across the board, and that we would expect to be true given the significant demand reductions that we've seen in this community over the past 20 years. What we did end up with is this list that you have before you and in your memo. And these are the ones that we're proposing to really dive deep into and evaluate and put on equal footing with the supply side strategies that Ruth showed earlier. So the first demand side strategy is extending the reclaimed water system to the UNC cogeneration facility. So this was actually, some of you may remember, was a consideration when the reclaimed water system was first developed as a future phase. Subsequent concerns have come up about the quality of the reclaimed water and the ability for it to, as produced, serve a need for the cogeneration facility. So we've added in with this strategy a look at enhanced water treatment, perhaps just for the cogeneration facility, but addressing that concern about the reclaimed water quality while also looking at the quantity benefit. Also, in talking to UNC, we understand that there's a strong push to develop the south side of campus. So rather than growing out, as past plans have showed, they're really focusing on growing the university up, particularly on the south side where Odom Village was. So the second reclaimed water strategy that we propose to look at is an extension of the reclaimed water system to that area of campus, and a concurrent, dual plumbing and, plans for the university to utilize that reclaimed water. The third demand side strategy that we propose to look at is on-site wastewater treatment and reuse, water and wastewater treatment and reuse. These types of facilities, we can look to, Chatham Park as one facility. Some of our school systems are collecting water on site and reusing it. The wastewater systems where they're collecting water, treating it on site, and then being able to use it. So there's some pretty progressive ideas of this. I'm sorry, I said the school system. They're an example for a latter demand side strategy. But rather than sending the wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant, treating it and using it as reclaimed water, but really a facility that would utilize that wastewater on site. The fourth demand side strategy is really a suite of smaller strategies. So individually, we didn't feel like any one of these initiatives could really move the needle in a significant way, but collectively, they really kind of addressed the demands that are forecasted for our community for the next 50 years. And that they could be implemented at a somewhat, or relative to some of the other strategies, a somewhat cost-effective and easy way. And so we're proposing to evaluate those as kind of a bundle and underneath this umbrella of a robust water efficiency, water conservation program at OWASA. So that's rainwater harvesting and condensate reuse for irrigation. That's where the school system is a good example. Unit submetering and water sense requirement. This would be for new development, actually requiring that tenants in those facilities are submetered, because we do see a noticeable decline in water use when the folks that are using the water have that signal. And then also concurrently requiring that rather than off-putting that water demand on the tenant, that whoever is developing that property puts the highest efficiency fixtures that they can. Water efficiency design assistance. So this would be a program offered by OWASA to work hand in hand with developers as they bring forward proposals. And, we would look at that and say, hey, have you thought about this? This is what, the latest technology is for saving water and water efficiency, and be able to bring that forward and really kind of work with our customers to propose those strategies. And then associated with that is looking at a conservation-oriented system development fee. So along with that design assistance, to also be able to say, you can save money on your system development fee, which currently is based on meter size, which is a decent proxy for water use, but there are certainly shades of gray in between meter size where a customer could be incentivized to reduce their overall water demand. So looking at that. On-bill financing for water efficient appliances, which would be where we financed it and the customer would pay back over time. And then minimize the need for system flushing for water quality. So we do some system flushing to keep water fresh, particularly at the edges of our distribution system. And to the extent we do consider this, but we have an opportunity in the review of our hydraulic model to look at it from a fresh perspective, from a water conservation and water efficiency perspective, to identify areas where we can loop the system so it doesn't require as much flushing to keep that water fresh. So tonight we're not giving you a final verdict on any of these. All we're asking is for your approval and blessing that this is the suite of strategies for which we will dive deeper into and really evaluate in a quantitative way and look at not only their impact on water demand, but the cost to do that, the impact on the environment, and the impact on our community and society. So really that triple bottom line that Ruth referenced earlier, comparing supply and demand side strategies side by side. And again, we're planning to bring these evaluations back to the board in early 2020. And there is a draft motion in your packet to consider if all of this sounds wonderful to you. Otherwise, well, in the meantime, Ruth and I are happy to answer questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Comments and questions from board members? John, Morris?
we're really in a very fortunate position here at OWASA to have a lot of water. Looking out at the baseline projection, out at 2070, we're still good. Our supply is adequate. And as Ruth has pointed out to us before, built into this yield number is a 20% reserve. So that means when our water use hits that blue line, we still have 20% of our water left. And this blue line doesn't count our allocation at Jordan Lake. So if you add all that together, we're in great shape. So we've already reduced our per account water use 42% over 27 years. It's really nice to have that number. This is this amazing graph that is on the wall in the conference room, which is quite amazing. So I think it's really good to look at these options to further increase our water use efficiency and reduce demand per customer. But I wonder what the effect on that on water rates would be. As we use less water, that lowers our cost for electric power and chemicals to some extent. But that means that the fixed costs, which are a big part of our cost, have to be larger per gallon of water sold. And so I hope that we set up a system so we can evaluate that, so that, there may be lots of residential customers who have already reduced their water use quite a bit and become more efficient. And so I think we should be cautious that we don't invest a lot of money in demand reduction strategies that would, further increase our fixed costs in a way that it would jack up the water bills for low and moderate income people who may not have a lot of options to become more efficient.
That's an excellent point. And certainly when demand side management catches a utility off guard, it can be extremely disruptive to finances. I think one benefit of having this discussion on the 50-year time frame is that it does give us an opportunity to consider the financial benefits associated with demand side management and conservation, and to think about those and plan, because that's really where the cost effectiveness of conservation and demand side management come into play, is when you're able to plan your capital accordingly, and think that long term. So that's an excellent point. And certainly it's an important part of engaging the community in these discussions, because we would not want to be caught off guard with a large initiative from a customer to all of a sudden, significantly reduce their water use.
Bruce Bond.
So this is a great study that you guys have done. I'm really impressed. On the demand side management, you all brainstormed with a bunch of local folks, big users, and I'm sure got good. We saw good ideas. Is it worth talking to folks outside of the area to learn about generic things that have worked in other parts of the United States that maybe can be modified to work for us also?
Yes, and I would say that's a huge part of conference proceedings that we go to, and always kind of keeping our ear to the ground of water conservation. I used to run a water conservation in Colorado. The strategies there are quite different than the strategies that we would implement here. So there's a lot of really progressive things happening, particularly out west, that don't relay necessarily back, but we do have our finger to the pulse. I think one, in evaluating these strategies, particularly that suite of strategies, a lot of that research will take kind of peer-to-peer research. And so it's another opportunity for us to reach out and consider those as well.
Any other comments? Bashir, Maura?
I was wondering about for the suite of options that we're looking at. Did we look at the reclaimed water for multi-family master meter properties as well?
That was a strategy that was identified and evaluated against that qualitative framework. And ultimately came down to the costs. We've actually have done that analysis in the past, looking at extension of the reclaimed water system, I believe to the Meadowmont area, and we've had a customer look at it for themselves of extending the water line, and the cost of doing that are pretty high, and the impact in terms of demand are pretty low. So that's how that got screened out as a strategy.
Okay, and same with like parks and playgrounds or like for, I guess that's also well, it's not residential, but for that customer as well, towns.
I can go back and look at the analysis that has been done in the past, but laying that reclaimed water line and extending that line is quite expensive, and it just comes down to just the economics of doing that for the customer and for OWASA. The overall cost to society is pretty high.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, I don't know if this is demand or supply, but what about like, as one of the small goals or small ones under that suite that you had, A, B, C, D, and E, whatever, just leak detection in water mains and reducing, I think I remember something like, I don't know, like 8% of our water is lost, or some percentage that was higher than I thought, even though it's lower than the national average. I just wondered if that's something that could be considered under G or.
It's like you were listening on all of our meetings. You have got all the good ideas. That was another one that we have looked at. If you'll recall, we conduct a water loss audit every year where we really dig into the data. We use an industry standard for evaluating the water loss, the AWWA water loss report. And in that analysis, there's a AWWA looks at what are the unavoidable real losses of operating a system, because just inherently there's going to be some leaks in the system, and they've done analysis to say at what point does it become cost prohibitive to chase all of those leaks, and they come up with an index. It's the infrastructure leak index, and if you're at 1, it means that your unavoidable loss in your system is equal to the actual loss in the system. So it's not cost effective to try to get below that, is what that index is saying. And so every year we look at that index number and use that as a gut check to say, all right, now does it make sense to look at some of those add-on technologies that Todd referenced earlier on the AMI system are really advanced leak detection systems. So at that point, it becomes a cost-benefit analysis of chasing those leaks in the distribution system. So I'd say that's a metric that we're checking in on annually and constantly evaluating it. We've been very close to that 1. So based on the industry, that was the punchline you were looking for.
No, actually, I was kicking myself because I forgot to mention or ask this to Todd. It was, does this technology that we have now allow us to use the pressure monitoring throughout the system? But I guess we're kind of at that point where it's at close to 1, I guess, is your index now. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, thanks. Oh, actually, so what are we doing as a board here?
You are blessing the list of 13 supply side and demand management strategies for staff to move forward in a more detailed evaluation. And so we'll be bringing forward to you at that in early 2020, January, the draft alternatives. So how these alternatives compare to one another. And so that's what we're asking for.
So for me, I feel like I kind of need to know which were the ones you guys looked at at the other meeting and decided against.
They should be in your agenda packet.
Okay, I apologize. I totally didn't see that.
It's okay. Let me reference you to the page. The ones on the cutting floor are on page 7.13. And that's a summary of the strategies that didn't make the cut.
Oh, yeah. I missed that. Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? I got a couple comments, but
Okay.
I'm glad you brought up the low-hanging fruit analogy because that's what I was going to say. I think this is a good list. It may not be, and I support the motion, but may not be, may not generate anything that's really feasible right now, but I think it's OWASA's responsibility to keep a clean list and modify it as we update the long-range water supply plan over the years. And this list looks like a pretty good list, well worthy of pursuit. The one on about the UNC South Hub, it says extend the reclaimed water piping into that area. It is in that area. It's right adjacent to that. It runs right through the middle of it, the way it's drawn, the way I understand where the South Hub is. But so it wouldn't have to be extended very far. And perhaps maybe you need to modify that a little bit, but to reflect that. But the piping is in that area that's shown on the UNC map that identifies the location of the South Hub. Using the Aesop fable as an analogy, the low-hanging fruit has been picked based on the water sales graph that you showed, and perhaps even some of the not so low-hanging fruit. But we shouldn't treat this, even though it's not maybe not reachable right now. We shouldn't say they're sour grapes and just quit reaching for it. We should continue to pursue it. John, did you have another comment? John Morris?
I just had one other issue I want to bring up. Several of our supply options involve Jordan Lake. There are several different options, the partnership with Erie and Durham, the Western Intake, et cetera. So, this brings up this issue we've been kicking around for a long time. Does the water and sewer boundary agreement have any relevance to our using our Jordan Lake allocation? So the way I read the boundary agreement, it doesn't apply. It's like two ships passing in the night. It doesn't really have anything to do with our using our water from Jordan Lake. And, Bob and I has that same opinion, which he's informed us. Of course, there are other people who at times have had other opinions about this. So one thing I'd like to really suggest that we do, Ed, this is something that I hope that we can get this done to resolve this issue before you retire, and don't kick this down the road to the next guy who may or may not, know about it and understand it and have the background on it. So I don't think it's going to be that hard to resolve it, and I think we can do that. One other thought about Jordan Lake, the way we have our plan set up now, Jordan Lake is a backup source. And so that may be okay for a while. I'm just thinking the population in this area is growing, the whole triangle is growing, so there are going to be a lot of demands for water at Jordan Lake. And up until very recently, there were two senior people at the Division of Water Resources who oversaw this allocation process. They had been there the whole time, they knew about it. And so we had a lot of institutional support there that understood why we had this allocation. Those people have now retired. And the Division of Water Resources itself has been reorganized a lot, and the water supply people are now more mixed in with water quality people. And so that focus on water supply and water management has been diluted to some extent. And of course, state government is subject to many political winds and storms, and leadership changes. So I basically feel that Jordan Lake is an important source for us for the long run, and I think we're going to be very well advised to resolve this boundary agreement issue and to build Jordan Lake into our plan and and use it occasionally. Because otherwise, I think it's going to be increasingly at risk as, if we have sort of walled it off as something that's not really part of our plan, and the demands for water in this region keep growing, we may lose it. So that's just, thanks for hearing me out on that one.
That I don't see that it has been walled off. I don't see that it has been, that our access to the Jordan has been walled off. You and I have talked a number of times, and I certainly agree. It has been my opinion, both before you came to the board and since you came to the board, that the boundary agreement does not restrict OWASA's access to its water supply allocation from the Jordan Reservoir. I would suggest that requiring some sort of acknowledgement by some group of agencies or government, requiring that group to acknowledge that our view is the correct view, may be kicking a hornet's nest that we might well walk right past without ever disturbing. The various views that have been expressed by various elected officials from our elected jurisdictions over the years about access to the Jordan are as disparate as the elections provide succeeding members from time to time. So I don't, my own sense is that I'm comfortable in my view, and I'm very comfortable in your agreement with that view. We're comfortable with each other's view. And I'm not inclined to require anybody else to say they agree with me at this point. I would say that OWASA should proceed as though it has access to the allocation, and when it needs to use it, it will use it. It would then be up to someone, if any agency or person were to suggest and wanted to contest OWASA's right, it would be up to that person to litigate about OWASA's right to do that. Well, I would much prefer to respond to that sort of an assertion rather than commencing yet another community discussion about it, because I think it's clear that OWASA has access to that allocation, and that it was not the intention of the boundary agreement to interfere with that access.
I completely agree with that. I think it's a mistake to ask people to verify that you have something that you're already sure you have.
Right.
Exactly. But there are other ways. I think probably the best solution is for us to take a little more high profile position on the way we see this and then just sail ahead. So that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? So there's a motion that's been recommended on page 7.15. The motion reads that the Board of Directors approves the staff recommendation to evaluate the supply and demand management strategies. Is there a motion and a second for this? Okay, a motion made by John Morris and Bruce Bowen seconded. There's no further discussion. Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, on the next item, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ruth. Review board work schedule, and Ed Kerwin, would you please walk us through all this?
Yes, if there's no request by board committees or board members, and I will then call your attention to agenda page 8.2, 8.3, our draft agenda for your next meeting, September 26th, Chapel Town Hall, 7 p.m. That's our annual meeting, so you'll be getting a presentation from Stephen, other staff probably, and our auditors. As you know, we've targeted this meeting for quite some time now to present to you a draft process to prioritize lands for forest management. So that's on your agenda for the 26th. There are two relatively new items. One, solar lease prospect, and I'm going to let Mary Tiger give you a little preview tonight about what to expect on September 26th and what you'll be asked to do at that time. Mary?
Hello again, Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager. In late July, we issued an RFP for solar lease agreements as proposed in the Energy Management Plan that you all approved earlier this year. We received 2 proposals last week. As expected, there are 2 firms approved by the Utilities Commission to offer this type of agreement. They both proposed. One looks pretty promising, and we ended up putting forward 5 facilities as options for them to propose on. So we proposed the roof of this building, the roof of the operations center back behind us here, the top of the clear well at the water treatment plant, as well as the yard at the Cane Creek Reservoir site just downstream from the dam, and a small portion of a field in the biosolids property. And so we have those numbers now. We're making sense of them. We're verifying them and really kind of getting some assurance in them. And we would like to bring that forward back to you all to look at those numbers. We're not in California, so the lease agreement from day one, we are paying more in a lease than we're getting a benefit on our energy bill. And so there are some contingencies in this lease agreement, which we're doing lots of research to shore up, and certainly thinking about it from a contractual perspective about how to shore up. But we're asking that on September 26th, we'll bring forward to you a summary of that proposal and request your go, no-go decision on proceeding with that process.
Okay, also on September 26th, Stephen, I know you'll talk about underwriter for the upcoming revenue bond.
Yeah, so we've been talking about that we're going to go out into the bond market and get sell some revenue bonds to raise funds to help pay for our CIP program. There's just a routine type procedure that we'll be asking you to vote on at next October 26th meeting. But what I wanted to cover with you is that so in this offering, we're going to get what we refer to as new money, in other words, new borrowing, for somewhere in the $15 million range, give or take a few million. But we're also going to refund or refinance one of our existing issues. We've got about 6 years left on it, and by refinancing it or refunding it, we can save over $1 million over that 6-year period. So that transaction will be wrapped up into one. So recently, last week, we need to secure an underwriting team, and one of the big players there is the underwriting financial institution. And so we sent out, with the help of our financial advisor firm, essentially a request for quotes for this transaction. And while the underwriters can't say, we guarantee we're going to do this, that, and the other, because it's based on market conditions and all that, they can tell us, give us an indicative price quotes for what it will be, and it's highly unlikely that they would do a bait and switch on us and promise one thing now and only to come back later on. It's just really unheard of in this kind of a market. So we sent it out to not 100, dozens firms, but 6 firms. We got 3 responses, and I think I told you 4 the other day. Bruce and I talked about this the other day. Wells Fargo, a smaller firm that I'm not all that familiar with, R.W. Baird, and J.P. Morgan. And of those 3 quotes, if you will, Wells Fargo came out as the most beneficial to us, not by a lot. The transaction costs, the fee that they would get is roughly same among the 3, but the money that we stand to make on the refunding side of it is about $40,000 more for us, that we would make we would save $40,000 more over that 6 years than the next nearest competitor, and $30,000 or $40,000 from the most expensive, if you will, and $30,000 from another. So, quick aside here, we've also issued a request for proposals for banking services. We've received those proposals. We're in the evaluation process, and we've got some more interaction to do with the board on that. But we've got scheduled for the first November meeting to talk about who we would select from the people that have responded. But as you'll recall, part of the impetus behind doing that RFP was that Wells Fargo has been in the news a lot. They're doing some things that have been less than stellar, and I know some of the board members expressed some concern about that. And while we haven't decided to rule out anyone on that, that is something that's of concern. So if it were up to me, I know it's not a lot of money difference, but it is more money savings to go with Wells Fargo. I would, in the absence of any of that other information, I would pick to work with them. It's a single transactions. It's not a long-term. We're not entering into a long-term relationship or extending the current relationship at all. However, I am sensitive to we are sensitive to the board's concerns on this, and so Bruce and I talked about it. And I think I'm speaking for Bruce, that he was most comfortable coming to the board and getting your feedback on it. So what I'm asking you today is to tell us, are you okay with this, working with Wells Fargo on this, or would you prefer us to work with, let's say, the next one in line? I think I covered everything that we talked about.
Any comments by the board members? Yinka and Coyle?
So you're asking us now or when we meet September 26th, if we're comfortable with the next one in line?
Yeah, no, I'm asking you now because there's some work that this team needs to do in preparation for even that September 26th.
So who's the next one in line?
I believe R.W. Baird is the next one, and then J.P. Morgan Chase was the third.
If I can add to that, there's a dollar difference that we need to consider, and then it's the optics of us working with Wells Fargo. As Stephen and I talked, it's probable that these other firms do some crappy stuff too, but Wells Fargo is in the news quite a bit on this, and their business practices are such that I'm not particularly comfortable supporting them. So it's always a sort of dollar trade-off there, but for modest, and I think at $30,000 compared to the amount we'd receive in proceeds from these loans and our operating expenses and our revenue and all that is relatively minor. So I certainly would be comfortable with our financial advisor, if possible, going back to these other firms to see if they're willing to reduce that number some. And if not, I might even still be willing to go along with the next hire company. But that's single person here on the board, and it's everyone's decision.
Bob Morgan?
I'd just like to ask Bob Epting, how does our fiduciary responsibilities coincide with this type of decision?
Well, your fiduciary responsibilities require you to exercise your best judgment. That is to make a decision that is, in your best judgment, best for the user community of OWASA's customers. So certainly if anybody felt like an existing relationship they had with one or more of the applicant institutions might influence their decision, then they ought to disclose that. That would be a part of the fiduciary responsibility. I don't think, though, that the council can give you an answer that says that you must choose one or two or number one, number two, or number three, based on what I've heard tonight. I think that's why there are 9 board members, so that each of you says what you feel, expresses your own best judgment, gives your opinion about it, and then see how those fit together, because it's the way those 9 opinions fit together to form hopefully to form a conclusion that gives direction to the work of the board. So I hope that's not too cloudy a response, but I don't think council's in a position to say you have to choose one or the other here. I do not think there's anything in your fiduciary responsibilities that require you to hold any of the institutions responsible for conduct that has occurred in different locations than, or with different staff people that you might be working for. That's not said with respect to the conduct of any of the applicants, but simply to say that often what we read about in the newspaper and hear about in the news is the product of work and conduct that has occurred in other places, and that may or may not be representative of the character of the institution as a whole. I would remind you of that. But that's, again, up for you to exercise your own judgment about, not for council to tell you that there's some legal pathway you must walk, except to use your best judgment.
Bruce Ronberg, and then we share.
Yeah, I'm Bruce too. That's a joke. Everybody's looking a little tired here. I would just comment too about the fact that this is on the commercial side of the bank. And so the issues with Wells Fargo, really the predominant ones go back several years now, and their key is they've changed and they reestablished themselves last year. So, and $30,000 or $40,000 is not pocket change. So that's just my reaction to the issue. Thank you.
Share.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely a proponent of this reevaluation of our banking services. But I think that what we're talking about here is a one-off situation where we did not have the same review of, their socioeconomic and other factors in that RFP or whatever you want to call it.
Email.
So I don't think it's a fair, it's not the same thing. And I think that for me, I feel that we should go with, if comparing apples to apples, we should be looking at the lowest cost. And especially if it's, I think 40,000, even though it is not, it's kind of in between of not chump change, but I'm it's kind of somewhat of a bitter pill, but I'd be okay with sticking with the lowest bidder on this one, personally.
Other comments? Bob, Morgan?
I would agree with Bruce Shear's comments. I think our responsibility to our customers is to get the best deal for the organization. And I'll just leave it at that.
So I'm getting a sense that from the speakers that most people are okay with Yinka, Iampoya.
Yeah. So I think I'm kind of opposite. I'm more leaning towards responsibility for people in our community who we represent. So for me, I would like to see the other two who were next in line besides Wells Fargo.
So do we need a motion or?
That'd be best.
Would somebody care to offer a motion? Or is there further discussion?
So, quick response to you, Bruce. The issues at Wells are not over. Just, in the past month or so, some more stuff's come up where, all on the consumer side, where folks instructed Wells to close their accounts, and this happened to a number of folks, and Wells agreed to close them, but in fact, they didn't close the accounts, and they continued to charge fees against those accounts. on the issue of, we're dealing on the commercial side versus the consumer side, it's the Wells brand. And, you know, I just feel that companies need to learn the lesson properly, and that's by losing business. It's not by, you know, being in the news or having, you know, modest fees slapped on them. Again, just my opinion about it.
Bob?
I make the motion that we instruct the staff to bring the best deal for this, to the board.
Is there a second?
Well, hold on. When you say the best deal, you mean financially?
Financially, yes.
Is there a second? Motion made by Bob Morgan to instruct the staff to request the staff to bring the best financial deal to the board meeting, and second by John Morris. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Well, I'm wanting to interpret the vote you're about to make to say that that we brought you the three, and the best one is the most advantageous financially is Wells Fargo, and that's what you're deciding. We would need very much the desire for it to be decided tonight.
Can I have clarification? So we're voting tonight, and then we're going to be adopting it on the 26th,
Yeah,
voting again?
What you're doing now is telling us who we should work with. The motion or the resolution on the 26th is going to be the same whoever we pick. It's not dependent on who we pick. But there's a lot of work that we need to do for that, and the bond issue that needs to be started, right away. So that's why it's important to choose the underwriter.
The paperwork on the 26th will authorize the underwriting team to proceed, and those will include the underwriter, the financial underwriter, and I think bond counsel as well.
Bond counsel, underwriters counsel.
And so those documents have to be filled out and prepared. It's a package, and that's why we need to know the name to put on the documents. And so, again, I'm not selling one applicant or another, but that's why we need to know the name tonight. So we would, absent your naming Wells Fargo, my advice would be that staff would construe that to mean that they're working with Wells Fargo and bringing back a package with Wells Fargo's name for vote next time is what that motion means.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So in a sense, how we're voting tonight will be basically almost how we're voting on the 26th? Or, so like if someone is, for me, I'm not gonna vote for this. So on the 26th, I'm assuming I'm still not gonna vote for that either.
Yeah, they're two different things. The thing on the 26th is just a process of the bond issue. So if you were to vote against that on the 26th, you'd be voting against us issuing bond. It has nothing to do with who we're working with at that point.
But you still could vote against.
You could just still vote against it, yes. Mm-hmm. I'd have a hard time paying all the bills, but you could.
Any other comments?
When do we get the banking RFP stuff back?
It will come before the board. There'll be some more interaction we have with you. I need to talk to Bruce about the committee's involvement, but on November 12th, the 14th.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, I feel like that's the point to make change personally, even though I don't love this partner.
Any other comments? Ready for the vote? Should we raise our hands to vote? All in favor? 5 in favor. All opposed? 3 opposed. The motion carries 5-3.
Thank you.
On agenda page 8.2, 8.3 is, I'm sorry, 8.4, 8.5 is a look ahead to the October 10th work session, 6 PM here in the community room. And there are two relatively new additions. Todd Taylor, will you say just a couple things about the resolution that'll establish the intent to amend the sewer use ordinance? Just a little bit of a preview of what that is, why it's being requested on October 10th.
Sure. I believe, well, several months ago, I believe Rushir brought this up, that it had been, a while since we had reviewed our sewer use ordinance, and Rushir was asking some specific questions about, how certain things were handled in other jurisdictions. And we have completed that work of reviewing other sewer use ordinances in the state, and also have worked with the state to make sure our ordinances is at least complying with all the requirements that they would have us do as far as the state's model ordinance. And we've got a few revisions that we want to bring back, and part of that process is that the board will authorize us to actually send the sewer use ordinance changes out to the various jurisdictions and the university to receive comments on that. And there's a period of time that they have to review that. They get the comments back, and then we will bring it back to the board, in hearing those comments. If any changes that might have happened, and at that time, we would be able to vote on changing the ordinance. So that's what that's about. So next time you will see our proposed revisions that we would send out to the various jurisdictions, and be sending that out for comments, and then there'll be a waiting period while we receive those comments. Am I got any question? Yes.
Wait, I'm confused. Do you send out the comments to stakeholders before we get it, or?
No, the board reviews.
Okay,
They have
got it.
to, the board has to agree that we agree with these revisions. Then we send it out to the various jurisdictions. We get comments back. Whatever those comments are, we'll compile them. If there are any changes in the language or anything like that, we'll bring those back to the board at a later date.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Todd. Another item we are adding to the October 10th agenda is an update on our ongoing work to replace the failed sewer line, force main, Rogerson Drive. And Vishnu is going to give a little bit of a preview about that work, where we are, when we think we're going to be done, and our latest ideas on what the final price tag might be. But again, on October 10th, you'll have a much more complete and detailed update on the project to include costs. Vishnu, preview?
Sure. So again, out of all the capital work we have going on right now, certainly the work that's ongoing on Raleigh Road with the Rogerson Drive force main emergency repair continues to be one of our most important projects in construction. And this started back in mid-April, and we provided some formal reports to the board back in April and May about the project, and we're continuing to send out some of the status updates as we send them out to the public. Simon Lobdell is our project manager, and he will provide a report at the October 10th work session. Currently, right now, we have completed the two bores underneath Highway 54. So there was the crossings that we had to complete at Oakwood Drive just to be able to get the full flow bypass in. And then just recently we completed the work to have the permanent pipe underneath 54 at Rogerson Drive. So a lot of work has gone on to date. Right now we're looking at mid-October as the best estimate of completion. So we're starting to zero in on what work remains to be complete. There are less uncertainties now. We received a revised kind of reconciliation and projection of costs for the all-in cost going forward at $5.5 million for the construction for the work that was to be completed. at the end of the project, including final restoration. So we are continuing to push forward. It's a really important, it is essential backbone infrastructure for our collection system. So we are continuing to move forward with that. Simon will provide some background about, what makes, why this is so important and some of the decisions we made along the way, and, what we'll have at the end of all of this construction that started back in April.
So Vishnu, the completion of the piping will be mid-October.
That's correct.
So when the restoration will be completed. The project has impacted a lot of neighbors there, a lot of residents along those two streets, and also it impacted certainly people like me that drive up and down that street.
Right. I think so the restoration piece is, that's something that still needs to be refined. We are intending to hold another community construction briefing about the completion of the project later this month, and that will certainly be part of the information that gets shared with the folks who are impacted, both on Rogerson, Oakwood, and also the Raleigh Road area. So I don't have a great answer for you. The paving section, there's a little more in terms of schedule uncertainty, in terms of what might need to happen and when that can happen. But we are looking at mid-October right now on pipe installation, and again, that's a little more known in terms of what needs to happen.
Well, at some point, the winter weather will set in.
That's right.
And probably affect the restoration schedule.
Yeah. No,
sooner is better than later on.
Right. That's correct.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Also in your package, the 12-month calendar, pending items, and the 3 to 5 year recurring items. And if you have any questions or guidance for staff, now's the time.
Any questions, comments?
And if not, as far as key action items, I didn't record one that I think rises to the level of keeping score on this sheet. Obviously, you've given us a lot of good feedback on a number of items, and we appreciate that. And also on the item regarding the underwriter, we certainly recognize bringing that to you the night of the meeting with no more than a conversation between Stephen and Bruce is not in keeping with how we do these things. I mean, in the past, this was at a level that staff just handled and did. But again, given the sensitivity when we saw the numbers, which is why, and I apologize that, you didn't have advance notice, and we definitely think Bruce was giving good guidance about, rather than proceeding to have the whole board weigh in on that. So again, I just want to acknowledge that I know you didn't have a heads up and background. You had to act on it tonight, and that's not how we do things, but appreciate the conversation and the discussion on that, and the action you took.
If I can add one thing, lest there be worry that the bond issue won't happen, I would certainly vote to support using wells for the bond. Since the direction of the board is to go with wells, I'm not going to hold up my vote on that.
Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. So without objection, the board will now convene in a closed session to discuss a personnel matter.